Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and today we're taking a look at a pretty infamous card, and that card is Arceus, Indalga, and Palkia GX, more commonly referred to as ADP. And this Pokemon it's something. It's also pretty misunderstood, and there's a lot of things to talk about with this card. I've talked about this card some on the channel in the past, but I mean, it's quite old at this point. We've had the whole Sword and Shield era and Scarlet and Violet era between this card releasing and today. I mean, we still have obviously some Scarlet and Violet era cards, and the Mega era is kind of a continuation of Scarlet and Violet. It's a little weird, but regardless, this card is quite old. However, this card is really interesting to talk about. Recently, I talked about this card slash this deck, I guess I should say, on the podcast with Uncommon Fossil, where we ranked the top decks of the modern era, being the tag team era and on, essentially, is what was in there. And ADP is definitely a deck that I think people aren't like very. I'd say it's a bit more of a myth and a legend. No pun intended. They're not mythical. They're legendary, I think. But regardless, it's a Pokemon that's talked up quite a bit, and it is good. It is a good card. I'm not going to sit here and say this card is bad. However, I am going to sit here and say this card is a little misunderstood. And actually, okay, I will say I played this card some. This is during the TCG era. I do quickly want to mention as well that there is another deck called ADP. The other deck called ADP, which also features Arceus, is actually named after this deck. It's like a bit of a, I guess, parody. I know it did win the World Championships. It was Arceus, Pikachu, and Decidueye, and so that's ADP as well. But anyways, the ADP deck is Arceus, Indalga, and Palkia GX, generally paired with Zacian V. Look at a list that isn't a quote Zacian list. This actually doesn't play any copies of it, but Zacian V was the main way to play it. There was this other deck called this ADP Moltres is what's called here, or ADP Birds or something. But we'll mostly be taking a look at the Zacian ADP deck here. But we should take a look at ADP here first, the card itself. So first of all, it has the most important thing about it. Well, I guess you need to understand tag teams and tag team GX Pokemon first. That's the most important thing. And the power level of this era was a little lower than standard, not drastically lower, but a little bit lower. And so we see 280 HP on a basic 3 prizer. Again, these are 3 prizers, so that is an important thing to note about it. The tag teams featured multiple Pokemon on them, and were all 3 prizers. It's not a 3 prizer because there's 3 Pokemon. It's a 3 prizer because there's multiple Pokemon. Also, all of them were basics. Obviously, Arceus, Indalga, and Palkia are basic Pokemon in the TCG, but there was like Reshiram and Charizard, which featured as a basic Pokemon as well. So, and something I guess worth mentioning here for explaining the mechanic. And then there is some synergy between some tag team stuff, but it's pretty minor. It doesn't really matter too much for this. There also is the actual part that is, I guess, mechanically meaningful, which is the GX part of it. GXs are multiple prizes. As I said, the tag team GXs are basic 3 prizers here, but you have a GX attack. GX attacks are something you can only use once per game. You can only use one GX attack per game entirely. So you could have a deck with multiple GX attacks. For example, I'll pull up a Zacian ADP list here. We see ADP as well as Mawile GX, and I guess Dedenne GX as well, which you could attack with. Mawile GX is a pretty terrible GX attack. Same thing with Dedenne GX, and especially in this deck, the attack Alter Creation GX is very important to the deck. And they did different things. A lot of them did like 200 for 3 or something like that, which was like fine. However, then we take a look at this attack here, and it says for just 1 Metal Energy, for the rest of the game, your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And then you have this other effect here, which this is special to tag teams, if you didn't know. This is special to tag team Pokemon as well as tag team supporters, though they are generally pretty different. But they have the similarity of you can pay an additional cost. Here it's another water energy. So then if you have a metal and a water, you again get that first part where you do 30 more damage for the rest of the game, which is good. But then when you knock out your opponent's active Pokemon with damage from those attacks or an attack, then you take an extra prize card. So this, again, takes an extra prize on your opponent's active Pokemon, and it is just through regular damage. At the time, I believe, essentially all the attacks that saw play were regular damage. Certainly the Pokemon obviously this was paired with were regular damage. And Alter Creation is really the main talking point of this card, but the overall game plan is still very important as well. So at this time, I'll pull up, I guess, ADP again. Sure, why not? I will say ADP was good. certainly at this time, but it wasn't like all-time dominant or anything like that. Was it the best deck in the game? Well, at this time, certain stuff, I'll just say, was going on, and so tournaments were in like a weird spot. However, ADP was like good, but it wasn't like broken or anything like that. It was like maybe I'll just say Charizard DX pre-rotation or something like that. Like good, certainly, but not, not broken. Pre-rotation, we got Charizard, Gardevoir, Gholdengo, and Dragapult, I'd say, kind of all vying for the top spot. So ADP was in a similar spot for a bunch of its time in Standard and not really surpassing that. However, it did earn a reputation of being, well, we'll get to that. But Zacian ADP here, we see that it plays Pokemon like Dene GX, Crobat V, and Eldegoss V. I'll just pull up Dene GX. It is the best of them. And this card, it's a really good card. It allows you to discard your hand, draw 6 on play. This is kind of like Meowth EX, I guess. And it has 180 HP or less. So that's very important here because Arceus and Dalgan Palkia GX does Ultimate Ray, which does 150, which doesn't knock it out. Except it does when you add the extra 30 from Ultra Creation GX. And your opponent will probably have a Pokemon like the Dene GX in play, if not 2, but they'll probably have at least 1. And you can go ahead play something like Boss's Orders, or Great Catcher also does that for Dene GX, but you can play Boss's Orders, bring up their Dene GX, Crobat V, whatever, these Pokemon that they almost have to put down to play the game. Certainly, it's very good to play these down. In general, I would say these cards are better than Meowth. I definitely say Dene GX is better than Meowth. EX. I'd say Crobat V is probably better than Meowth EX. You could certainly argue the other way. I'm not the biggest Meowth EX fan. I actually made a video on that yesterday. But then also, I'd say LSV is weaker than Meowth. But still, all three quite good cards here. And as you see, there's 4 caps of them in the deck in total, as well as Mono GX would also meet that requirement. So if your opponent plays any of them down, that's rough, but again, your opponent will want to play them down. So then you'll just go ahead and take 3 prizes on that, quote, 2 prizer, because you take an extra prize with Ultimate Ray there. And then Ultimate Ray does, in here, the attack cost is Water, Metal, Colorless. This is Water and Metal, which is the attack of Ultra Creation GX's attack for the extra cost. Again, with Ultra Creation GX, you want to attack with the 2 energies like all the time. It's like never worth really using it for the 1 energy attack there. But you'll do 1 more attachment there. And generally, this deck, you could turn 1 go second and power up Ultra Creation GX with the 2 energies. It was possible. A lot of times, so you'd go first, and you would go ahead and you'd quite simply just attach, then your second turn going first again, you'd attach again an Ultra Creation GX, and then turn 3, you'd Ultimate Ray for 3 prizes on a opponent's bench Pokemon. Then you power up Zacian V. Zacian V does 230 here, boosting that with ADP, you're doing 260. Pretty much you just like knock out most Pokemon in the game at this time because most of the Pokemon are basics, and you knock it out, and you take another 3 prizes and win. So that's your game plan there. You'd win by turn, I believe that's turn 4 there. And what could your opponent do against that? They could not play those other Pokemon potentially, but again, that's harder to set up, and that's it. So that is what the deck does. There is some more nuance to it, but that is the main point. And so the deck was in some ways linear. That being said, the deck wasn't super linear. In order to power this up turn 1 going second, you need to use a combination of Metal Saucer and Energy Switch to attack there. You need to play cards in a certain order, and it was kind of interesting. On top of that, we look at another Zacian ADP list. Oh, okay, this was actually more popular than I thought. Well, I had enough more popular than I thought, but I thought most of these tournaments, I thought there weren't any IRL tournaments at the time, which Zacian and ADP were out together. But I forgot there were some. I think it stopped with with Rebel Clash the next set, but that's not the right deck. But pulling up Zacian V, there are some interesting things. Not this. This is not an interesting thing. But you have some interesting sequencing stuff, I guess. I suppose, the deck can do some stuff. It's not like the most boring deck ever or anything like that. It's not the craziest deck ever, but I'll just scroll through a few more lists here. This list is again pretty similar, but you have that option for potentially the turn going second attack there. It is a somewhat boring deck, but it's not the most boring deck. And an interesting element is attack with different Pokemon. Oh, wait, I just realized this is a deck that I wasn't even realizing that it was playing Galarian Moltres V. So it's not as bird heavy as this deck, but You can have some decks with different attacking options like Galarian Moltres V, Galarian Zapdos V, Zacian V, so you do have some versatility because you are a Dragon Pokemon. We even see this in Standard with Dragapult EX. Like kind of. Not really, let's be honest. Dragapult EX, you're mostly attacking with Dragapult EX. We don't really see decks running energies of every type to attack with Dragapult EX. Previously, we did when we had Luminous Energy pre-rotation, though with Dragapult EX, you saw Monkey Dory. Now, we don't have Luminous Energy, but you still see Monkey Dory and Dragapult EX. Ultimately, Dragon types kind of force you to play more into their specific types, unlike with something like, I'm trying to think of a deck that doesn't do that in Standard that people play, and that would be, I mean, a lot of these are one type, but people just play that one type. Maybe Megas, not Megastar, that's not a good example. Or Ends. Pretty much none of these actually fit their role, but like, for example, Sterility GX, you could play it and pair it with water if you wanted to. So it's some more options, but Arceus, Nangla, and Palkia force you to play two types, giving you more types to easily tech in, is kind of what I'd say. So you do see some interesting tech cards there. On top of that, I will also mention something kind of wacky. This is weak to Fairy. This deck was considered very good, and was also kind of hard to counter because Fairy doesn't exist, right? That's my running bit, that Fairy doesn't exist because then there wouldn't be 10 types, whatever. Well, not whatever, because 10 types is awesome and you should subscribe, but Fairy technically existed at this time, but there weren't very many Fairy cards and they were pretty bad. So hitting this deck for weakness was not really happening, is what I will say. But anyways, you have ADP here. This is able to just kind of have a lot of HP as well. That's why it was kind of surviving attacks relatively frequently. But you could also knock it out at times, and your opponent would just be in a pretty rough spot. So the deck, in terms of how it compared to the other top decks, was kind of fair. This deck gets a bit more complicated when we talk about it next to single prizes. I'll just pull up, say, I mean, there weren't really any single prize decks at this time, I don't think. Let me see what I can find. I believe this was this season. Sounds about right. You have a Rango Control, maybe Malamar. Yeah, Malamar, you got a single prize deck here. And so when you're attacking with a single prizer, you're generally not taking big one-shots, and you're taking a more slower approach to the game. You look at Alakazam in Standard, not doing that. Alakazam is more of a glass cannon. But if you're not looking at a glass cannon single prize deck, which there weren't really at this time, there kind of was with like Blacephalon and a few others, but they were not super single prize focused, then you would be, two-shotting ADP. And you look at it, or even three-shotting, right? So if you're three-shotting a three-prizer and they're one-shotting a one-prizer, then it trades evenly. That's not super good because you're spending more resources than them to set up your attacker. But if you three-shot a three-prizer, you, for example, do that twice, then, two-shot a three-prizer twice, that's going to take you 4 turns. And, maybe you can't really do that, but if you can just spend an extra turn or whatever, or, you're spending more resources, actually committing to knocking out their Pokemon or whatever, then you're at a bit of a disadvantage. This will going to take 6 turns to knock you out. This is not the case with ADP. ADP spends 1 turn, and this is just turns of attacking and taking knockouts. It spends 1 turn setting up, and then 3 turns taking knockouts. So it's 4 turns instead of 6 turns. It is still kind of winnable, but it is pretty rough there with a single price deck that's not super strong there. And so a lot of people have credited ADP as a reason as to why single price decks are bad at this time. But single price decks are still bad. Like, they've been bad since ADP and also before ADP. I guess single price decks aren't terrible now. You got like Slowking and Alakazam and Team Rocket Honchkrow and Festival Lead. Like, these decks are in Crustle as well. Crustle's a little different. That's a hard stall deck. But other than the rest, the other ones are single price decks. I'd say they're normal single price decks. I'd say they're glass cannon single price decks though, and that means they are kind of bad, right? Let's be honest. They're fun. Slowking is fun, it's cool and all that, but it can just whiff super badly. I was at a local tournament the other day, and one played Slowking and they didn't do anything, right? That's not shocking, because they weren't able to set up because the deck isn't so consistent. And generally, single prizes just aren't really good enough to keep up with multi-prizers. Currently, actually, 2 prizes are the ones to beat. And also older 2 prizes. I actually, again, recently talked about some older cards, or I guess talking about newer cards and how they're bad compared to the older cards. So yeah, we see Dragapult EX and Yomasogropon EX and Zoroark EX and Raging Bolt EX, and these are all EXs that aren't from the Mega era. The EXs from the Mega era are not good. Some are like Meowth EX is okay. The rest are all I think bad. Bejeweled EX is like okay-ish. Not a terrible deck. I've been playing it some, playing against it some. It's all right. It's all right. It's not all that. So pretty much we see like the older two prize EXs. Also, when we talk about ADP, again, the single prize thing is somewhat valid, but it's not like entirely valid. Yes, single prize decks kind of sucked against ADP, but they sucked against like everything anyway, so that doesn't really matter too much. Unfortunately, I know I love single prize decks as much as everyone else, but people like them because they're not so good. Also because they're easier to get, right? I will say, I said I played ADP at this time some. It's on PCGO, which is different than PCGL, and so the older client, it was harder to get cards. So I played less different decks. I played some single price decks and some weird stuff, but regardless, ADP was very good against single price decks, as was everything else. Then you look, though it was better than other decks against single price decks. Then you look at how it pairs against multi-price decks. Again, it's going to be taking 3 turns because you're taking 2 one-shots on essentially turning them into 3 prizers. And then you also need your turn to set up with alter creation. So while it really warps the game with single prizers, it doesn't warp it that much with 2 prizers. If you have a tag team or like a multi-prizer like Zacian V that one-shots Zacian Vs and 2 prizers, then you can just attack 3 turns in a row with that Pokemon, and then you'd win. So it's actually even in terms of the prize trading. I mean, ADP gains an advantage as the game goes on because it gives up a turn at the in the early game, and those just trade off evenly pretty much. I mean, it's not identical by any means because I mean it's by some means it's identical, but you're setting up things in a different way. You're also not pressuring your opponent's board as much, so in some sense it's actually worse using Alter Creation. You look at expanded format, Alter Creation is not very good. Dragon type is so good in expanded. See a dragon deck here that did play ADP. Plays it as a one of. I will say there was a counter to ADP that sees some play, not just to counter ADP, but to counter other stuff. But overall, ADP just isn't that good in expanded. Despite the fact you can attack with it super consistently, turn one going second with double dragon energy, one of the best cards of all time. Overall, ADP was good, and it also did enable some interesting gameplay patterns, I suppose, with some versatility. I think there was more theoretical fun ideas than people played because that's how the games often go when you want to play the best stuff. But overall, ADP was annoying to play against with single prize decks, but again, they weren't super good in general, and this is not the reason single prize decks were bad. Also, in terms of how it paired against multi-prizers, it was okay. It was not bad. It was quite good, and sometimes pretty difficult to deal with, but you also could beat it. Like, this deck was good. It was just a good deck. A very good deck. Legitimately one of the better decks of the modern era, but by no means the most dominant deck. Or if it is, that's fine. That means there's a lot of balance and parity there. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell. It really does help support the channel, and tell me your thoughts about this Pokemon and other Pokemon. Also, huge shouts to YouTube members for supporting the channel. It really legitimately does mean a lot, but also just for everyone liking, subscribing, and commenting cool stuff as well. But I hope you all enjoyed, and as I said, see you in the next video.